everyone, and welcome to another episode of the All Words Free podcast. So, fun one. Today I had my stitches out, or the day recording this. So, yeah, that's all go. That's all solved. An 18-month mystery, and here we are. But, yes, that's quite nice just in time for Christmas. So it's the 23rd, today again on the day of recording. So, yeah, Christmas is coming around. It feels kind of strange. I haven't particularly felt that Christmassy this year. I mean, I didn't really last year either, but it sort of feels, especially this year, that Christmas is just sort of here and is a day and doesn't really feel any different. I've only really got into like Christmas songs and stuff like last night today, so it's rather a delayed Christmassy holiday feeling. I think, when I was in Oxford, there was all the lights and stuff, which I love, and it's all I feel wintry, snuggling up warm, big coats, whatever, but Christmassy may be a bit of a stretch. But no, it's nice to kind of finally feel a bit more Christmassy. I've been listening to some Christmas songs, had a Bailey's coffee today, so, all those sorts of things. It's a bit more, I guess it's a bit more winter, but just a bit more Christmassy. Tomorrow's Christmas Eve, which is crazy, can't believe it. Christmas Day, we're going for dinner, and it'll be a busy day, I think. I think Christmas Day itself is quite packed, but it's nice to see people and everything. That's what it's all about. But yes, it's a very kind of packed day. It's only really Boxing Day we actually get to digest everything. But no, it'll be nice, and yeah, it just kind of feels like it's here and it's going. I think also, I was working in the lab at the start of Advent, and like Advent arrived, it just didn't feel like real. I think, as I've written in a thought piece before, it's that feeling of kind of drifting through things and not really feeling very present. And I think that was definitely how I felt, and now it's kind of just dawning on me, and everything feels like, did that actually happen, or was it a dream? Dreams feel just as real as wakefulness. But I don't know, it's one of those things. And I think with the routine of going into the lab and everything and doing work, Christmas just never really touched me. But yeah, now I'm at home and like you can indulge in more, Christmas songs and all that jazz. It's a little nicer, it's a little more Christmassy. But to get onto the topic at hand, no, I'm not doing a Christmassy episode this week. I am releasing a Christmas story tomorrow, so on Christmas Eve, which will be lovely. It's a story I wrote last year. And it was inspired by my grandma, and so I wanted to get out there this year. It was a bit late last year when I actually finished it, so yeah, I thought it'd be nice. It's a little brighter, more Christmassy thing, kind of children's story adjacent, I guess, in the lead up to Christmas, because my content is not exactly the brightest of things. But today, getting onto the topic at hand, I'm going to be talking about brain types, but majoritively about human innovation, human invention, and also what it all means and whether this deeper analysis of human intelligence really has a purpose. I'm going to be using The Pattern Seekers, A New Theory of Human Invention by Simon Baron-Cohen as a springboard for this. So to begin with, we're going to just discuss this book, the ideas in it, my quiz taking, which will become more apparent as we go through, and start conversation from there. So without further ado, let's get going. So I bought this book, I think it might have actually been in Bristol, in this really nice kind of independent bookshop, but I bought it a while back. I always keep a fiction and non-fiction book on the go, and I'd recently finished Novelist's Vocation by Murakami, and so I needed another non-fiction, and this was in my book collection, and so I thought it's time to read it. And it's been really interesting. It's much more science adjacent, very novelist subverted, but it's really interesting. I definitely recommend it for anyone who's involved in who's interested in psychology or the human condition, evolution, anything like that. So the book basically begins with talking about the different types of brain. There are 5 categories of brain types, as dictated through different studies, and yeah, so that everyone can kind of fit into one of these 5 types of brain. There is type S. So type S is the systemizing brain. So this is the sort of person who is more attuned to logic, kind of more STEM adjacent, if you think stereotypically. They are highly processive and they're more adept to things like invention. Whereas then on the other side, there is the type E brain. So this is the empathizing brain. This is the person who is more attuned to social cues, finds it easier for conversation, easier to form relationships. And then there's the type B, which is the balanced brain. So each of these take a roughly third of the population, but obviously mathematically, if each was exactly a third, then that wouldn't really account for the other 2 types of brain. The other 2 types of brain, which are a bit rarer, are extreme type S and extreme type E. So Baron-Cohen focuses on the extreme type S more throughout his book, which I'll get onto. But extreme type E are people who are extreme empathizers, per se. So there's a high proportion of the E brain type in women and a high proportion of the S brain type in men. However, that's not necessarily, it's not necessarily always the case. And these proportions are kind of, 40% to 60% or 70% to 30%, these sorts of numbers. So this kind of leads into that idea of the gendered brain, and it's actually really interesting to read about. So there is something in the fact that there is a male and female brain, but it's not dictated by your sex. So, for example, as I've said, the type S brain is more common in males, but just because you are a male doesn't necessarily mean that you have a type S brain. And I actually have a type S brain. I took a test. In the back of the book there is the SQ, the systemizing quotient, and the EQ, the empathy quotient. And I took the test and did all the maths and the numbers and all that jazz. And yeah, I came out as a type S sort of person, which correlates well with my STEM inclinations. But interestingly enough, the type S brain or type S brain people, that kind of systemizing and inventive streak also feeds into things like art and performance and music. So yeah, it was really, really interesting in that way. But going back to the extreme brain type, so an extreme type E sort of person would be very, very good at figuring out people's emotions, from their expressions, and communicating very, very well. But they would have a below average systemizing quotient. Score, which essentially means that they are not as adept to finding connections between things and innovating. So what is the systemizing mechanism? So to quote Baron Cohen, the systemizing mechanism entails 4 steps, which together he calls systemizing. So step 1 involves asking a question. For example, why did the candle blow out? Or how do birds fly? Or when is it dangerous to go out to sea? Baron Cohen goes on to say that there's no evidence that other animals can ask themselves questions like this, even without words, even without having a audible and discernible language. But he argues that an animal or a person doesn't need language to ask themselves a question. He says that it's clear that pre-verbal children are asking themselves questions when we can see them experimenting with a toy in systematic ways. Interestingly, he says that other animals don't show this drive to experiment, particularly early on in their lives. And instead, in contrast, you have toddlers who are already delving into finding out particular patterns, such as the shape of leaves, and categorizing them. So the second step is answering the question by hypothesizing an if and then pattern. So this is taking one thing, the input, and then changing it to become different, which becomes the output. Baron Cohen says that we search the immediate vicinity in case a cause of the change is visible, or we speculate about a cause that must be there, but may be invisible. For example, a gun barrel that is smoking, and the only visible nearby factor that moved was the trigger, we might hypothesize that the trigger being pulled back was the cause of the change. If the gun barrel is smokeless, and the trigger is pulled, then the gun barrel produces smoke. Now in step 3, the if and then pattern has to be tested in a loop. So this may be repeat experimentation or repeat observation, to ensure that what we originally saw to be the case always holds true. This can go round and round and round, and this is one of the primary factors that separates us from animals, but also is one of the primary factors in human cognition and higher intelligence. We go back and test things, we go back and see if we can make things better to optimize. If the pattern is confirmed and is new, we have an invention. So if we change either the if or the and, or indeed both the if and the and, then do we see if there is a different result? And in this way, we have another invention from the same system, if slightly altered. This is at the core of the systemizing mechanism and for human cognition. From here, we can then decide whether we want to keep this or whether we want to change things, and mainly as a result of the change improving the efficiency of the original invention or the system. And of course, it's important to note here that the and can be several steps. So it could be if X and Y and Z, then A. I ran out of letters, but you get the point. So an if and then, the if and then system, the if and then process does not have to be 3 steps, or indeed 2 steps and a result. It can have multiple iterative steps, it could have multiple inputs and changes. These all lead to our capacity for invention. Linking to this, people with extreme type S brain types, which is the main focus of the book, as I mentioned, have a very highly tuned systemizing mechanism. So these tend to be your inventors. For example, Thomas Edison had an extreme type S brain type. And so these are people with high systemizing but below average empathy. Now this is cognitive empathy, and it's important to separate this from affective empathy. So while cognitive empathy is the ability to discern people's emotions and to see social cues and to interact, affective empathy is our ability to care for people. It's our compassion. It's our ability to give aid. So while somebody with an extreme type S brain may not necessarily realise that somebody is feeling bored when they're talking to them or feeling upset without having to say that they're upset without crying, they will donate to charity. They will get gifts for people at Christmas. So I think it's very important to delineate these differences, as Baron Cohen does. I also appreciate the fact that the author highlights the concept of neurodiversity. Inherently, there are 5 types of brain model, there is neurodiversity. Everyone is different. Baron Cohen talks about autism and how statistically autism and extreme type S brains are linked, both genetically and experimentally, with experiments with testosterone levels in the fluid about the fetus. So when pregnant women assented and the fluid about the fetus was tested, it was shown that higher testosterone levels correlated with having a type S brain, but also correlated with autistic traits. So Baron Cohen also says that people with extreme type S brains are not necessarily autistic, and people who have autism do not necessarily have extreme type S brains. It's just that there is some statistical link here. And he also reflects on the fact that, say, for example, taking Thomas Edison, he also talks about Albert Einstein and Hans Christian Andersen, and that these posthumous diagnoses of autism are not helpful. He says that theorising about one's mental state when they're alive or not, there's no purpose to this. He reflects on people currently, people alive, and people who may need aid. And he also talks about a study that he did. So he's a Cambridge man, and in his clinic they studied a wide range of people to figure out the different brain types, but also looked at the correlation between autism and the extreme type S brain type. And through interviews and all these different things, they came to the results, as we've said, that they correlate, but also that 2/3 of autistic people in the clinical study had felt suicidal at one point in their lives, and also a third had actually attempted suicide. This is a systemic problem, and I find it very important and very valuable that Baron Cohen focused on this as a key point as part of his research. It does shout to the still contemporary negligence of people, quote unquote, outside of the norm. So as a final message, Baron Cohen goes on to talk about the education system, what works in its current format and also that which doesn't. He mentions the current general way in which we go from a very broad idea of knowledge, a very surface level on multiple topics, to then narrowing down later in life, such as I've done with going through from primary school to now applying for PhDs in biochemistry. But he also highlights that hypersystemizers or autistic people tend to want to specialise early. They may have a particular focus or a particular niche that they're really interested in or want to delve their attention into. And therefore he points out that the current curriculum does not work for these people and will not nurture these people and potentially lead them to future success. In this way, he argues, as others have done previously, that we should alter our current method of educating children. We should allow flexibility in what students take earlier on. We should allow them to focus on something that they love, whether that be mathematics or science or art or, as Baron Cohen says, a dead ancient language. If a child has a passion for a particular subject, then why not let them explore that subject? Why not let them grow and thrive in that subject? I think that it's important, obviously, to have those basic levels of mathematics and English that one needs to get around in society. I think there is definitely something in allowing children to explore and allowing them to have the specialisation, particularly when the generalised curriculum may do them a disadvantage. As Baron Cohen says in his final message, their minds are wired to seek patterns and to systemise insatiably through eagle-eyed observation and careful step-by-step experimenting. Among the new generation of hypersystemizers will be some of the great inventors of our future. Their novel ideas can become innovations, but only with our support. If we acknowledge that some autistic people were and still are the drivers of the evolution of science, technology, art, and other forms of invention, their future can be different, but only with a shift in our culture and society. So I took the test, and as I've said, I have an S-type brain, which correlates with my STEM focus in studying and career, but also links to my love of writing and my love for organisation. Not a hair out of place. Okay, so the test itself, I had some ideas. So the EQ and the SQ are inherently biased by the person taking it, right? So it's a sliding scale where each scenario is given a strongly agree to a strongly disagree, and there's no neutral, which I'm always like, oh no, I'm too on the fence with all these things. I'm like, well, I don't disagree, but I don't agree either. Like, I'm different in all different situations. But it's inherently biased by the taker, right? So everyone, unfortunately or not, is biased towards normality. Everyone wants to fit in, right? The scoring system is very broad, and so will push people in certain directions. I think that, if you see the scores for each option while you're taking the test and you know what a low or high score means, you will inherently bias yourself to thinking, oh, well, I should have a high score, so I'll choose the high score option. It's also entirely subjective. Different scenarios may prompt different ideas in different people, which may lead to a skewed result and not accurately reflect their true brain type, for example. So something that piqued my interest was the differentiation between the systemising system found in humans and not found in animals. The author explains away potential systemising in animals with alternative strategy, such as survival or sensing a cue. But, before I get into this deeper, the whole topic is under the bias, humans are better. If you go in thinking that humans are the superior species, does that alter the product of the research? I'm not arguing that animals do systemise, though. As Baron Cohen says, there must be some reason humans could prosper over other creatures, as we have done, including the ability to invent. We cultivate animals for our own good, like food or labour, leading to a superiority complex as a byproduct of control. While communication undoubtedly occurs in other animals, including our closest ancestors, and they have social learning and imitation abilities, Baron Cohen argues that our ability to systemise raises us above. We've adapted higher forms of language and have also gained the ability to interpret through said language. Our abilities to empathise and we can infer what another of our species is thinking, and we are able to make predictions based on this. This is our if and when thinking at its best. And I also think it's important to highlight, you talk about systemising, the systemising mechanism, if and when. It's all innovation, invention, and invention is obviously a way in which humans have prospered and sprawled over the earth. However, this empathising mechanism, these little roots in our brain, are just as important. Without being able to communicate and without forging groups and families and connections all across the world and within our own location, even the ability to understand ourselves, we can't negate the importance of that too. Because without that, would we have even invented anything? Because without valuing our own lives and the lives of others in survival in a deeper and more complex way, we wouldn't have invented things to make our lives easier and help ourselves prosper, as well as the dark side of inventions, of course. But taking the example of door opening. So a dog may push the handle down and it would swing open. So this is an example of associative learning, where action A leads to action B, a single-step process that is not developed upon, or a chance encounter without purposeful invention. You know, the dog may press the handle down and the door opens and they get outside. This may have been just pure statistical chance. It doesn't mean that the dog intended to open the door to get outside. It just happened. For us, though, for humans, we wonder why, or we seek explanation, and we will troubleshoot if it goes wrong. If we press and the door doesn't open, maybe we look at the lock, turn a key, grease the hinges. This may occur even with no knowledge of the system. In this case, perhaps a young child who does not know how a lock works, or indeed what a lock is. Another example is food, right? We spice it, we try different amounts of things and perfect a recipe. We experiment with flavours, whereas other apes don't do this. However, interestingly enough, domesticated apes in zoos have been taught to see causal relationships, for example, between pressing the door handle down and getting outside, or chipping a stone to a pointy shape as a tool or a weapon. In the wild, we don't see this, but it raises an interesting point about the role of socialisation in human innovation. Baron Cohen argues that animals exhibit repetitive or imitative behaviour, meaning that if one individual has success with, for example, a longer stick, then another will copy it. For humans, things such as this will arise multiple times independently, such as the bow and arrow, with iterations improving upon the source material. There's an element of imitation in modern times, though, I think. For example, the addition of coffee to a chocolate cake for a richer taste, or the fastening of a load to the roof of a car in a very certain way with a certain knot. These could have come about multiple times in different originators, particularly in a world with billions of people on it, but it does raise the important point of copying versus original ideas. The arguments in the book are, of course, biased by Baron Cohen's own thesis. I don't disagree with him. Much of it is very compelling. However, a couple of times I wondered if the if and then model was not being moulded to fit each situation perfectly and left unapplied in the animalistic cases. Still, it's very intriguing, and our ability to invent has undeniably allowed us to prosper in many ways. For example, Professor Rachel Carmody of Harvard University in Cambridge, Massachusetts, says anything that allows an organism to get energy more efficiently is going to have huge effects on the evolutionary trajectory of that organism. For example, she highlights a key development as cooking. She argued that cooking transforms the energy available from food. Carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, they provide our body with nutrition and are unravelled and exposed when they are heated. Now, to layer on this kind of animals as humans anthropomorphizing idea, in another recent study cited from the New Scientist, chimpanzees were tested for their ability to perform difficult tasks. Seemingly, they performed better when with an audience, perhaps recalling the human need to do better when there are witnesses, both in tasks and also morally. Myself, I've felt the increase in stress alongside people watching your performance, whether that be something like dancing, the making of a cup of coffee, walking down the street past your crush, or performing well in a pub quiz. Everything feels harder, I think, when there is pressure of being perceived. However, perhaps it is this very thing, stress, that helps us to excel. It's a very human thing to have this behaviour, so seeing this in apes is unprecedented. A thought I did have, though, regarding this study was that the chimpanzees, while they learn what to press, they don't understand the meaning of the order. In this way, when playing a game where numbers had to be chosen in ascending order, or what humans dictate to be ascending order, the apes learn patterns. So this is rather than finding the thrill of success that a child may feel when getting their times tables right. It's not a logic puzzle, it's a habit puzzle, which yet again separates us from our ancestors. This, overall, also made me think about the usefulness of our systems as a whole. The clear benefit is that our numbers, our inventions, our art has led to our place in the world as humans, as relative to other species. I wouldn't be writing on a laptop, recording this podcast on a phone, writing full stop, speaking this language, without our ability to systemize. On the other side, though, there is a non-necessity to all of these things. We don't need laptops or cars or numbers or language to survive. They help us navigate the world. The latter two is the focus here. And make sense of relationships and ourselves through minds that crave logic and certainty. Because our mind needs surety and flails and self-actualization, we are driven to sort everything into neat little categories. We just can't stand a good mystery. So on the evolution side, would we still be here without systemizing? And was it therefore some kind of fate that led us to where we are today? You know, our ability to systemize and empathize makes us want that certainty and makes us want to figure things out and invent and continue to find new things. It's a tireless hunger for the next best, the next step, the next way to rise above, which ultimately leads people into competition and leads to difficult power dynamics and almost unnerving power dynamics, as we see in politics all the time. There are mass benefits to our brains and how they work. You know, we can forge relationships, we can create beautiful things, and we can do beautiful things for each other and acknowledge ourselves and follow our desires. We can be the domineering species on the planet. But there are downsides too, you know, our inherent combat with nature, our overthinking, our deteriorating global mental health, and our ability to recognise neurodiversity is so important. It's integral to not see people as abnormal, but to see people, to see people as a variation on an ability to systemise, as a variation on the genetic changes that allowed Homo sapiens to overtake the planet. We are all members of one species. I found this topic really interesting. It was only really the article in the New Scientist about the chimpanzee thing I read ages ago, and they inherently philosophise everything. So I found it interesting to consider the kind of, are we anthropomorphizing the chimpanzee, or are we actually seeing something scientifically relevant? I think this whole idea of bias is very important, especially in field of science and evolution as a whole. And then reading the Pattern Seekers, it kind of developed on that idea from there. But yeah, it's an interesting kind of topic and idea, and something nice to discuss potentially. I also think that while thinking philosophically and scientifically and all that jazz about this, it's nice to just recognise the world for as it is. You look at all these intricate molecules and everything as a scientist, and then you see the world for its everyday. And there are different layers of the human experience, especially in our modern world. And so it's nice to suspend your disbelief a little, but also nice to engage in these more intense conversations, philosophical, scientific, literary conversations. But thank you all for listening. I hope you enjoyed this slightly shorter piece, but I definitely recommend this book for anyone interested in this kind of topic. And yeah, Merry Christmas, although I'm actually releasing this after Christmas, so Happy New Year. Thank you for listening, and I will speak to you next time. Take care, and let's keep talking.